Hello everyone. My name is Adam, and I'm the owner of the Return to Life channel. Thank you for stopping by and taking the time to listen to what I want to share. Your presence here is not just a view, it's a connection, a reminder that we are not alone on our journey of living, overcoming, and growing. Return to Life was created with the hope of becoming a warm and honest space where everyone can find empathy, motivation, and hope. The name Return to Life carries the message I truly believe in. No matter what we go through, setbacks, illness, or the darkest days, we can still stand up again, heal, and live a life that is more meaningful. On this channel, I share inspiring stories about overcoming difficulties, facing challenges, and learning how to heal. These stories may be about failure, loss, pressure, or moments when life feels unbearable, but I believe that within every pain, there is a lesson. And within every fall, there is a chance to become stronger. One important part of Return to Life is sharing real experiences related to health and illness. I want to help people gain knowledge to protect their health, starting from small daily habits like eating well, getting enough rest, and taking care of mental well-being, to recognizing warning signs and seeking medical help early when needed. Health is not something we automatically have forever. It's something we must care for every day. And sometimes the right information at the right time can help prevent serious consequences. Besides that, I also share everyday moments from daily life. Good days, tired days, lonely moments, and times when I feel like giving up, but still choose to keep going. I want everything on this channel to be as real as possible. No exaggeration, no pretending to be strong all the time, because everyone has moments of weakness. What matters is learning to listen to our bodies, understand our emotions, and slowly build a better life. If you find this channel meaningful, please follow Return to Life so we can walk this journey together. You're also welcome to leave a comment and share your story, because your experience might become strength for someone else out there. Once again, I'm Adam. Welcome to Return to Life, wishing you peace, good health, and the courage to start again whenever you need. Every morning, Emily woke up with strange red marks on her skin. At first, she barely paid attention to them. They were small, slightly raised, and a little itchy, the kind of thing most people would blame on a mosquito or a random bug that somehow found its way into the apartment during the night. So she did what most people would do. She shrugged, scratched the spot on her wrist, and moved on with her morning. But a few days later, the marks appeared again. This time there were more of them. 3 small bites sat close together on the inside of her arm, almost like a tiny dotted line drawn across her skin. Emily noticed them while brushing her teeth in the bathroom mirror. She leaned closer to the glass, squinting slightly, trying to figure out what kind of insect could leave marks like that. Probably mosquitoes, she muttered to herself. Chicago summers were known for them. Even though she lived on the 3rd floor of a small apartment building, insects occasionally made their way inside when windows were open in the evening. At least, that was the explanation that made the most sense. Behind her in the hallway, she could hear the familiar sound of claws tapping lightly across the wooden floor. Max appeared first. The golden retriever slowly walked into the bathroom, his tail lazily swaying from side to side as if he had already decided the morning was going to be a good one. His soft brown eyes looked up at Emily with the quiet patience only dogs seem to master. A second later, Luna jumped gracefully onto the bathroom counter. The gray cat stretched, her long tail flicking across the edge of the sink as she examined Emily with the calm superiority of a creature who clearly believed she owned half the apartment. Emily smiled. Living alone in the city could feel quiet sometimes, but with Max and Luna around, the apartment never truly felt empty. Max loved to sleep near the foot of her bed every night, curled into a warm golden circle against the blanket. Luna preferred a different arrangement. The cat had long ago claimed the pillow beside Emily's head as her rightful sleeping place. It had become their routine. Every night, Emily would turn off the lights, slide under the covers, and within minutes she could hear the soft rhythm of Max breathing nearby while Luna settled in with a low purr beside her ear. It was comforting, safe, which is why at the time, Emily never considered the possibility that something else might also be sharing the bed with them. The next morning, she woke up scratching again. This time, the bites were on her neck. 3 of them, perfectly spaced apart. Emily frowned when she saw them in the mirror. Mosquito bites didn't usually appear like that. Still, she tried not to think too much about it. She finished getting ready for work, grabbed her bag from the kitchen counter, and headed for the door. Max wagged his tail excitedly when he saw the leash, already anticipating the short morning walk they took together before Emily left for the office. Outside, the air was cool and bright. The small park a few blocks away was already alive with people walking dogs, jogging, or sitting quietly with coffee on the benches. Max loved that park. Every afternoon after Emily came home from work, she would take him there again. The dog would run through the grass, sniff every tree in sight, and roll happily in the dirt, as if the entire place existed solely for his entertainment. Emily had always thought those moments were harmless, simple, normal. But what she didn't realize then was that something very small had already followed them home. And over the next few nights, those tiny red marks would start appearing more and more often, sometimes on her arms, sometimes along her back, and almost always in a line. Every morning after that, the pattern repeated itself. Emily would wake up, stretch beneath the blankets, and almost immediately feel that same irritating itch somewhere on her skin. At first, it was small enough to ignore, a quick scratch on the arm or shoulder, and the sensation faded. But the marks kept appearing. One morning there were 2 on the back of her hand. Another morning she discovered 4 tiny red bumps along her shoulder blade while getting dressed for work. They were slightly swollen, tender to the touch, and spaced almost evenly apart. That was the part she couldn't quite explain. Mosquito bites usually appeared randomly, one here, one there, but these seemed organized. The thought lingered in her mind for a moment before she pushed it away. It was easier to assume it was nothing. A few evenings later, Emily sat on the couch with her laptop open, while Max lay stretched across the rug beside her. Luna occupied the armrest like a gray statue, her yellow eyes half closed as she watched the room. Emily absent-mindedly scratched the back of her neck. It had started itching again. She reached up, touching the spot gently, then stood up and walked to the hallway mirror. 2 more marks, right beneath her hairline. Emily stared at them for a few seconds. Okay. That's weird, she whispered quietly. For a brief moment, a thought crossed her mind. Bedbugs. She had heard about them before. Stories from friends, news articles online, the occasional warning posted in apartment buildings. But she dismissed the idea almost instantly. Her apartment was clean. She vacuumed regularly, washed her sheets every week, and kept everything organized. Bedbugs were something people found in dirty motels or abandoned buildings, not in a neat little apartment in Chicago. At least, that was what she believed. Later that night, she prepared for bed like usual. Max climbed up first, circling twice before settling near the foot of the mattress. Luna jumped lightly onto the pillow beside Emily's head and began kneading the blanket with her paws before curling into a tight gray ball. Emily turned off the bedside lamp. Darkness settled across the room. Outside, faint city sounds drifted through the window. Distant traffic, the occasional siren, the quiet hum of the building's old heating system. Within minutes, Emily fell asleep. Sometime deep in the night, though she would not remember exactly when, she shifted slightly beneath the covers. Her arm brushed against the sheet. Something tickled faintly across her skin. She half awoke, scratching lazily at her forearm before drifting back into sleep again. The next morning, the marks were there again, 3 of them, perfectly aligned along the inside of her elbow. Emily stared at them for a long moment while standing in the bathroom. The irritation had grown stronger overnight. The itching was more intense now, especially during the early morning hours when she first woke up, and the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Each bite sat in a row, like tiny red stepping stones across her skin. That was the morning Emily finally started to feel something she hadn't felt before. Unease. Because suddenly the question wasn't just what was biting her. The real question was something far more disturbing. What if it was happening while she slept? What if something was moving across her skin in the middle of the night, and she never even noticed? Emily looked at her reflection in the mirror, the 3 red marks still visible on her arm. For the first time since this started, she felt a quiet chill run through her. Something in her apartment was not right, and whatever it was, it seemed to be getting closer every night. The next few days passed quietly, but the strange marks on Emily's skin did not disappear. In fact, they became part of her mornings. She would wake up, walk into the bathroom half awake, and glance at herself in the mirror while brushing her teeth. Almost every day, somewhere on her arms or neck, another small group of red bites had appeared overnight. Sometimes 2, sometimes 3, occasionally 4, and almost always in a line. At first, Emily tried to ignore them. Life in the city was busy, and she had plenty of things to think about besides a few itchy spots. Her job at a small marketing firm downtown required long hours, and by the time she returned home each evening, She usually felt too tired to worry about something that still seemed minor, but even while she tried not to think about it, the problem slowly began creeping into her daily routine. Every morning she scratched, every night she wondered. One evening after work, Emily sat at the small kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea, while Max lay stretched across the floor beside her. The golden retriever had spent most of the afternoon napping while she was gone, but now that she was home, his tail wagged lazily every time she looked at him. Luna, as usual, had chosen the windowsill. The gray cat watched the street below with intense concentration, occasionally flicking her tail whenever a bird landed on the railing outside. Emily absent-mindedly scratched the inside of her arm again. It had become almost automatic. She sighed and rolled up her sleeve to look more closely. 3 bites, another line. Seriously? She murmured. Max lifted his head slightly when he heard her voice. You wouldn't happen to know what's biting me, would you? She asked him with a faint smile. The dog tilted his head in the curious way dogs often do when they hear something they don't quite understand. Emily chuckled softly. Talking to Max and Luna had become a normal habit over the years. Living alone often meant small conversations like this filled the quiet moments in the apartment. A few minutes later she stood up, walked toward the laundry closet, and pulled out a new bottle of detergent she had bought earlier that day. Maybe that was the problem. Some kind of mild allergy. That seemed far more reasonable than the darker possibilities that had occasionally crossed her mind. So that night Emily stripped the bed completely. The sheets, the pillowcases, the blanket, everything went straight into the washing machine. She used the new detergent, ran the hottest cycle available, and then carefully remade the bed once everything was dry. Problem solved, she said quietly to herself. Max climbed up onto the mattress as soon as she finished. The dog circled twice before settling into his usual place near the foot of the bed. Luna followed moments later, leaping lightly onto the pillow beside Emily as if nothing about the evening routine had changed. Emily turned off the lamp and closed her eyes. For a few hours she slept peacefully, but sometime later that night, the itching returned. It wasn't strong enough to fully wake her, but somewhere in the back of her mind she felt herself scratching again. The next morning, when she looked in the mirror, the marks were still there. Not fewer, more. 4 this time. Emily stared at them in silence. So it's not the detergent, she said quietly. Later that afternoon she took Max to the park as usual. The small park was only a few blocks from her building, but it had become one of Max's favorite places in the entire city. The moment Emily clipped the leash onto his collar, the dog practically vibrated with excitement. Outside, the air was warm and bright. Children played near the swings while several other dog owners stood chatting near the walking path. Max pulled gently toward the grassy field where he liked to run. Okay, Emily laughed, loosening the leash. Within seconds, the golden retriever was bounding across the grass, sniffing every patch of ground as if searching for hidden treasure. Emily watched him with a relaxed smile. Moments like this were the reason she loved having a dog. After a long day at work, the simple act of walking through the park and watching Max explore always helped her relax. Eventually, Max rolled onto his back in the grass, happily rubbing his shoulders against the ground. Emily shook her head with a laugh. You're going to be filthy, she called out. But Max didn't care. He twisted and rolled through the grass with pure joy. After 20 minutes, they headed home. Back inside the apartment, Emily unclipped the leash and dropped it near the door. Max walked straight toward the living room rug and stretched out with a satisfied sigh. Emily sat down beside him and began absent-mindedly petting his stomach. Her hand moved slowly through his thick golden fur. Then she paused. Something caught her eye. Tiny black specks were scattered across the lighter fur on Max's belly. Emily leaned closer. At first she assumed it was dirt from the park. That's what happens when you roll in the grass, she said gently, brushing a few of the specks away with her fingers. They looked like small grains of pepper. Max wagged his tail lazily, clearly enjoying the attention. Emily stood up and walked to the kitchen sink to wash her hands, not giving the discovery another thought. But over the next couple of days, something else began to change. Max started scratching more often. At first it was subtle, a quick scratch behind the ear, a nibble at his back paw. But soon Emily noticed him pausing during walks to scratch his neck repeatedly. One evening while watching television, she heard the familiar rhythmic sound of Max scratching again. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Emily glanced over at him from the couch. You okay, buddy? Max stopped for a moment, looked at her, and wagged his tail. Then he scratched again. Emily frowned slightly. Maybe he had picked up something from the park. Fleas, perhaps. The thought crossed her mind only briefly before fading again. After all, the bites were appearing on her skin, not his, and the two problems didn't seem connected, at least not yet. What Emily didn't realize was that the tiny black specks she had brushed off Max's fur earlier that evening were not dirt at all. They were the first real sign that something much bigger had already entered her home, and by the time she would finally discover the truth, the problem had already spread far beyond the park. Over the next week, the strange bites on Emily's skin began to appear more often. At first, they had shown up every few days. Now it seemed like every single morning brought a new set. Sometimes the marks appeared on her forearm, other times along the back of her neck. Once she discovered a line of them across the lower part of her back while getting dressed for work. Each time the pattern was the same: small red bumps, slightly swollen, and almost always arranged in a neat row. Emily tried to tell herself it was nothing serious, but the itching was getting worse, especially during the night. It often woke her up briefly, forcing her to scratch before drifting back to sleep again. One night she rolled over in bed and rubbed her shoulder against the pillow, half awake and irritated. "Ugh," she groaned quietly, scratching again. Max lifted his head from the foot of the bed, blinking sleepily in the darkness. Luna barely moved, curled tightly beside Emily's head. Within minutes, Emily fell asleep again, but the pattern continued. The next morning, there were 3 fresh bites on the inside of her arm. 3 more, perfectly spaced. She stared at them in the bathroom mirror while brushing her teeth. This was getting harder to ignore. Later that day, at the office, Emily sat at her desk reviewing a report when her coworker Sarah walked over, holding a cup of coffee. "Hey," Sarah said casually. "Do you have a minute?" Emily nodded, still looking at her computer screen. "Yeah, what's up?" Sarah leaned against the edge of the desk and tilted her head slightly. "Random question, but what happened to your arm?" Emily looked down. The sleeve of her blouse had slipped back slightly, revealing a small row of red bites near her wrist. "Oh," she said quickly, pulling the sleeve down. "Probably mosquito bites." Sarah frowned a little. "In October?" Emily paused. Chicago's mosquito season had mostly passed by then. "Maybe spiders?" Emily added, trying to laugh it off. Sarah shrugged. "Maybe." But the look on her face suggested she wasn't completely convinced. For the rest of the afternoon, Emily found herself thinking about the question again. What was biting her? That evening when she got home, she sat on the couch with her laptop and finally did something she had avoided doing until now. She opened a search page. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before she typed, "Why do I wake up with bites on my skin?" The results appeared instantly. Mosquito bites, allergic reactions, skin irritation. Then another phrase appeared several times in the search results. Bedbugs. Emily frowned slightly and clicked one of the articles. As she read through the page, a slow feeling of unease began creeping into her chest. According to the article, bedbug bites often appeared in small clusters or lines on exposed skin. Arms, neck, and shoulders were common locations. Emily glanced down at her arm. That matched. Another line of text caught her attention. Bedbug bites often appear overnight and may cause itching that becomes worse during the night. Emily leaned back against the couch. That matched too. She quickly scrolled further down the page. The article explained that bedbugs were small insects that hid during the day in mattresses, bed frames, and furniture. At night they came out to feed. Emily's stomach tightened slightly. Her eyes slowly moved toward the bedroom door across the hallway. The idea felt unsettling, but it still didn't seem likely. Her apartment was clean. She vacuumed regularly. She washed her sheets every week. Bedbugs happened in dirty places, didn't they? Emily closed the laptop. "No," she muttered softly. "That couldn't be it." Trying to push the thought away, she stood up and walked into the bedroom. The room looked exactly the same as it always did. The bed was neatly made. The floor was clean. Nothing looked unusual. Max followed her in and jumped onto the bed, circling twice before lying down with a contented sigh. Luna jumped up a moment later and settled beside the pillow. Emily sat on the edge of the mattress and looked around the room again. Everything seemed normal, too normal. Still, just to ease her mind, she pulled the blanket back slightly and looked at the sheet beneath it. Nothing, just clean fabric. Emily exhaled slowly. "See," she whispered to herself. "Nothing there." For a moment she almost felt foolish for worrying about it. But later that night something happened that made the uneasy feeling return. Emily woke up suddenly. The room was dark. The digital clock on the bedside table glowed faintly. 1:48 a.m. Her back itched intensely. She reached behind her and scratched, half awake and annoyed. Max shifted slightly near the foot of the bed. Luna didn't move. Emily lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling in the darkness. The itching slowly faded. Eventually she rolled onto her side and closed her eyes again. But the thought from earlier returned briefly before she drifted back to sleep. What if the article was right? What if something really was coming out at night? The next morning, when Emily looked in the mirror again, the answers seemed a little harder to ignore. 5 new bites had appeared along her shoulder. 5, all in a line. Emily stared at them silently. For the first time since this began, she felt a small knot of worry forming in her chest. Something was definitely happening while she slept. She just didn't know what it was yet. And somewhere inside the apartment, the real cause was still hiding. That night, Emily tried to convince herself that she was overthinking everything. After dinner, she washed the dishes, took Max for his usual walk around the block, and returned to the apartment, with the quiet determination to stop worrying about insects she had never actually seen. The evening felt normal. Max stretched out across the living room rug, occasionally thumping his tail whenever Emily passed by. Luna sat on the back of the couch, calmly observing the room with the quiet confidence only cats seem to possess. Emily made herself a cup of chamomile tea and sat near the window. Outside, Chicago moved through another ordinary night. Car headlights passed along the street below. A distant train rumbled somewhere far across the city. Inside the apartment, everything felt calm. For a moment, Emily almost laughed at herself for getting so anxious earlier. Maybe Sarah had been right. Maybe it was just spiders, or some strange allergy. Anything seemed more reasonable than the idea of tiny insects living inside her bed. Around 11 that night, Emily turned off the lights and prepared for sleep. Max climbed onto the mattress first. The golden retriever circled twice, as always, before settling down near the foot of the bed with a soft sigh. Luna followed a few seconds later, landing lightly beside Emily's pillow before curling into a tight gray ball. Emily turned off the bedside lamp. Darkness filled the room. Within minutes, she fell asleep. For a while, everything was quiet. But sometime later, deep in the middle of the night, Emily suddenly woke up. Her eyes opened slowly. Something felt wrong. For a moment she lay still, trying to understand what had pulled her out of sleep. Then she felt it, an intense itch spreading across her back. Not a small irritation like before. This was stronger, sharp, almost burning. Emily groaned softly and reached behind her, scratching desperately across her shoulder blades. The sensation didn't fade. Instead, it seemed to spread, her arm, her side, the back of her neck. "Okay, what is going on?" she whispered groggily. She rolled onto her side and glanced toward the clock. 2:03 am. Max lifted his head slightly, sensing movement. Luna remained asleep. Emily sat up slowly in the bed, still scratching at her arm. Something about the feeling made it impossible to relax again. The itch wasn't going away. It was getting worse. With a frustrated sigh, she leaned over and switched on the bedside lamp. Soft yellow light filled the room. For a moment, everything looked completely normal. The blankets were slightly tangled around her legs. Max blinked lazily near the foot of the bed. Luna stretched and flicked her tail, annoyed by the sudden light. Emily pulled the sleeve of her shirt up and looked at her arm. Fresh bites, several of them. 5 small red bumps forming a narrow line across her forearm. Emily felt a cold wave of irritation. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. She pushed the blanket back, intending to stand up and get some anti-itch cream from the bathroom. That was when she saw it. Something moved across the sheet. Emily froze. At first she thought it was a piece of lint, a tiny brown speck slowly crawling along the white fabric. Her eyes narrowed. The speck moved again, very slowly. Emily leaned closer. Her heart began beating a little faster. The speck had legs. It was a tiny insect, small, flat, brown. It crawled slowly across the sheet, moving toward the edge of the mattress. Emily's stomach tightened. "No," she whispered. For a moment she simply stared at it, hoping she was imagining things. But the insect kept moving, alive, real. Emily grabbed a tissue from the nightstand and quickly pressed it down onto the bug. She lifted the tissue slightly. The small brown body was crushed inside. Her pulse was racing now. Suddenly the article she had read earlier flashed through her mind. Bedbugs hide during the day. They come out at night. Emily slowly turned her head toward the mattress beneath her. The sheet looked clean. Nothing moved. For several seconds she sat perfectly still. Then she did something she had not planned to do. Very slowly, Emily pulled the sheet away. The bare mattress underneath came into view. At first she saw nothing unusual, just pale fabric stretched tightly across the surface. Emily exhaled slightly. Maybe it really had been just one bug, but then her eyes moved toward the edge of the mattress. Near the seam, something shifted, then another tiny shape moved. Emily leaned closer, her stomach dropped. Inside the narrow seam of the mattress were small dark shapes tucked deep into the fabric folds. As the light reached them, one of the insects slowly crawled outward, then another, then another. They were everywhere, tiny brown bodies hiding along the seam, some of them barely moving, others crawling slowly across the surface of the mattress. Emily's breath caught in her throat. "Oh my God." Her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Her mind struggled to process what she was seeing. There weren't just one or two bugs, there were dozens, maybe more. Most of them had been hidden inside the narrow stitching that ran along the edge of the mattress. The moment the light touched them, several began moving. Some crawled deeper into the seam, others moved slowly across the mattress surface. Emily felt a sudden wave of horror run through her body. She jumped off the bed instantly. The movement startled Max, who stood up quickly and looked around in confusion. Luna darted off the pillow and landed silently on the floor. Emily stepped backward, staring at the bed as if it had suddenly become something dangerous. Her heart pounded loudly in her chest. She felt sick. For several seconds she simply stood there, frozen. The bed, her bed, the place where she slept every night, where Max and Luna curled beside her, where she had spent hours resting, reading, dreaming, and now she could see them clearly. Tiny insects slowly crawling along the seams of the mattress, waiting, hiding, feeding. Emily wrapped her arms around herself as a chill ran down her spine. A single horrifying realization began forming in her mind. Those bites, the lines across her skin, the itching in the middle of the night, all of it suddenly made sense. She hadn't just been sleeping in her bed, she had been sleeping above them. And every night, they had been coming out. Emily barely slept for the rest of that night. After discovering the insects hiding inside the mattress seams, she didn't dare lie down again. Instead, she turned on every light in the bedroom and sat on the living room couch, wrapped in a blanket while Max rested quietly beside her. Luna paced around the apartment for a while, clearly confused by the sudden activity in the middle of the night. Emily kept replaying the moment in her mind. The tiny brown body crawling across the sheet, the seam of the mattress, the dozens of insects hiding inside. Each time she thought about it, another wave of unease washed over her. She glanced toward the bedroom door. Even from the couch, she could still picture the bed in her mind. The mattress, the seams, the hidden spaces where those insects had been living without her ever noticing, and the worst thought of all lingered in the back of her mind. They had been there the entire time, night after night, feeding, moving, while she slept only inches above them. Emily pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and stared at the clock on the wall. 3:41 a.m. Morning suddenly felt very far away. When the sun finally began to rise, Emily had already made up her mind about what she needed to do. The moment pest control services opened, she was calling them. By 9 o'clock that morning, Emily was standing in her apartment kitchen, while a man in a dark blue uniform carefully examined the bedroom. The technician introduced himself as Daniel. He had been working in pest control for more than 15 years, and the calm, methodical way he moved through the apartment suggested he had seen situations like this many times before. Emily stood near the doorway, arms folded tightly across her chest. Max sat beside her, watching the unfamiliar visitor with mild curiosity. Luna, however, had disappeared somewhere under the couch the moment Daniel arrived. Daniel pulled on a pair of gloves and carefully lifted the edge of the mattress. Emily watched nervously. For a few seconds the room was quiet. Then Daniel sighed softly. "Yeah," he said. Emily felt her stomach drop. "What?" she asked quickly. Daniel straightened up and turned toward her. "You definitely have bedbugs." Even though Emily had expected that answer, hearing it spoken out loud still felt like a punch to the chest. "How bad is it?" she asked. Daniel lifted the mattress again and pointed toward the seams. Emily forced herself to look. Now that she knew what she was seeing, the signs were much easier to recognize. Tiny dark shapes clustered along the stitching of the mattress. Small black dots scattered across the fabric. Daniel gently tapped the mattress with his gloved finger. Several insects began crawling outward. "They hide in these seams during the day," he explained calmly. "Mattresses, bed frames, cracks in furniture, anywhere dark and narrow." Emily shivered slightly. Daniel then crouched beside the wooden bed frame and ran a flashlight along the narrow gaps between the boards. More movement, even more insects hiding in the shadows. "Looks like they've spread into the frame too," he said. Emily covered her mouth with her hand. Oh my God. Daniel stood up again and removed his gloves. How long have you been noticing the bites? He asked. About 2 weeks, Emily said. He nodded. That sounds about right. Emily blinked. What does that mean? Daniel leaned against the wall and folded his arms. Bedbugs reproduce pretty quickly, he explained. A single female can lay several eggs every day. Those eggs hatch in about a week. Emily felt a small chill run through her body. So if they go unnoticed for even a couple of weeks, Daniel continued, you can end up with dozens, sometimes hundreds. Emily glanced back toward the mattress again. The idea made her skin crawl. But then Daniel asked another question. Do you have any pets? Emily nodded immediately. Yes, a dog and a cat. Max wagged his tail when he heard her voice. Daniel crouched down beside the golden retriever and gently ran his hand along the dog's back. Have you noticed him scratching more than usual? He asked. Emily hesitated. Yes, actually. Daniel nodded slowly. That's what I thought. Emily frowned slightly. What does that mean? Daniel stood up again. Well, he said, bedbugs are probably causing the bites on you. He paused for a moment before continuing. But those black specks you mentioned seeing on your dog earlier? Emily's eyes widened slightly. Yes. That sounds like flea dirt. Emily stared at him. Fleas? Daniel nodded. Very possible. Dogs often pick them up in grassy areas or parks. Emily immediately pictured Max rolling happily through the grass only a few days earlier. But how does that connect to the bedbugs? She asked. Daniel shrugged lightly. It doesn't always, he said. But sometimes fleas get into carpets and furniture first. Then other pests find the environment comfortable too. Emily slowly processed what he was saying. So the fleas came from the park. Probably, Daniel said. And the bedbugs, they could have come from anywhere, he replied. Travel, used furniture, even neighboring apartments. Emily felt another uneasy chill. Her home suddenly felt far less secure than it had only a few days earlier. Then Daniel looked at the red mark still visible on Emily's arm. He leaned slightly closer. Those bites, he said quietly, do they usually appear in lines like that? Emily nodded. Yes. Daniel gave a small, knowing nod. That's a classic sign. Emily swallowed. Of bedbugs? Daniel nodded again. Then he said something that made Emily's stomach twist. When they feed, he explained calmly, they often bite multiple times as they move across the skin. Emily felt the room go slightly colder. Daniel pointed gently at the marks on her arm. So those lines you're seeing, he paused. That's usually them moving while you're asleep. For a moment, Emily couldn't say anything. The image formed instantly in her mind, tiny insects crawling slowly across her skin in the middle of the night, feeding, moving, biting again. She wrapped her arms around herself again as a shiver ran through her. Daniel noticed her reaction and spoke in a calmer tone. Don't worry, he said. It's unpleasant, but it's fixable. Emily took a slow breath. How? She asked. Daniel gestured toward the bedroom. Well, first, we're going to need to treat the entire apartment. And for the first time that morning, Emily realized something important. The problem she had discovered the night before wasn't going away quickly. It was going to take time and a lot of work. Daniel spent the next 20 minutes explaining exactly what needed to happen. Emily stood in the kitchen listening carefully, her arms still folded tightly as she tried to absorb everything he was saying. The situation felt overwhelming, but Daniel spoke in the calm, practical tone of someone who had guided many people through the same problem before. The first step, he said, is reducing as many hiding places as possible. Emily nodded slowly. Daniel pointed toward the bedroom. That mattress will need to go. Emily glanced down the hallway toward the bed. Just a few days earlier, it had been the most comfortable place in her home. Now the thought of touching it again made her skin crawl. Completely? She asked. Daniel nodded. Yes. You could technically treat it, but in situations like this, it's often safer just to replace it. Emily took a slow breath and nodded. Okay, Daniel continued. All bedding needs to be washed in hot water. Sheets, blankets, pillowcases, everything. Hot water kills them? Emily asked. It kills the eggs and larvae, Daniel explained. That's the most important part. Emily glanced toward the laundry room. She suddenly realized how much work this was going to involve. Daniel then crouched beside Max again. The dog and cat should also be treated for fleas as soon as possible, he said. A vet can help with that, or you can get flea treatment from most pet stores. Max wagged his tail happily, completely unaware that he had unknowingly brought part of the problem home. Emily reached down and gently scratched behind his ear. "You didn't know, did you?" she said softly. Max responded by licking her hand. Daniel smiled slightly. "It happens more often than people think," he said. He stood up again and began writing a few notes on a clipboard. "We'll schedule a full treatment for the apartment this afternoon. It will take several hours." Emily nodded again. "What do I need to do before that?" Daniel handed her the list he had written. "Bag up clothing, wash bedding, vacuum floors and carpets if possible, and try to keep pets out of the treated rooms until everything dries." Emily looked at the list. It felt like a lot, but at least now she had a plan. Once Daniel left, Emily stood in the middle of the apartment for a moment, staring around at the place that had felt perfectly safe only days earlier. Now she saw it differently. Every corner looked suspicious. Every piece of furniture suddenly seemed like a possible hiding place. Max padded over and sat beside her. Luna finally emerged from beneath the couch and jumped quietly onto the windowsill. Emily sighed. "All right," she said softly. "Let's fix this." The next several hours were exhausting. Emily began in the bedroom. Wearing gloves and trying not to look too closely at the mattress, she stripped every piece of bedding from the bed. Sheets, pillowcases, blankets, and even the mattress cover went straight into large plastic bags. She carried them to the laundry room and started the washing machine on the hottest setting. Then she returned to the bedroom. The mattress itself was the hardest part. Even knowing it needed to go, Emily hesitated for a moment before touching it. The memory of the insects crawling along the seams the night before was still fresh in her mind. But eventually she grabbed the edge of the mattress and carefully dragged it toward the door. Max watched from the hallway, his head tilted curiously as the large object slowly moved across the floor. With a final push, Emily managed to maneuver the mattress out into the hallway where it would be collected later. When she returned to the bedroom, the empty bed frame looked strangely bare. She vacuumed the carpet thoroughly, running the vacuum along every edge of the room and beneath the bed frame. Then she vacuumed the couch, the rugs, even the corners near the walls. By early afternoon, the apartment looked almost the same as before, but the air felt different, more cautious. A few hours later, the pest control team returned. This time, Daniel was joined by another technician carrying equipment and sealed containers of treatment chemicals. Emily gathered Max and Luna into pet carriers while the technicians prepared the apartment. The process took hours. They sprayed carefully along baseboards, bed frames, furniture seams, and small cracks, where insects might hide. The smell of the treatment filled the air with a sharp chemical scent that lingered in every room. Emily waited outside the building with Max beside her, and Luna resting quietly in her carrier. She sat on the front steps, watching the late afternoon traffic move slowly along the street. For the first time all day, everything felt quiet. Max rested his head on her knee. Emily ran her fingers slowly through his golden fur. "You really love that park, don't you?" she said softly. Max wagged his tail. Emily smiled faintly. She couldn't blame him. Rolling in the grass had probably felt wonderful at the time. Still, a small feeling of guilt lingered in the back of her mind. Maybe if she had noticed the signs sooner, the scratching, the black specks, the bites, maybe things wouldn't have gotten this far. After several hours, Daniel finally stepped outside. "All done," he said. Emily stood up quickly. "Is it over?" Daniel nodded. "The treatment should take care of most of them, but we'll schedule a follow-up visit next week just to be safe." Emily nodded. "Thank you." That evening, when Emily finally returned to the apartment, it felt unfamiliar. The bedroom no longer had a mattress. The air still carried the faint scent of the treatment chemicals. Max walked cautiously through the rooms, sniffing the floor and furniture as if inspecting the changes. Luna jumped onto the couch and curled up quietly. Emily stood in the doorway of the bedroom and looked at the empty bed frame. The room felt different now. Not unsafe, but no longer as carefree as before. She knew it would take time before everything truly felt normal again, but at least now, the problem had finally been confronted. The first night after the treatment felt strangely quiet. Emily stood in the bedroom doorway for several seconds, looking at the empty bed frame where the mattress had been only a day earlier. The room smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals, and the air felt slightly cooler with the window cracked open. For the first time since the problem had begun, there were no blankets piled on the bed, no pillows, no mattress, just the bare wooden frame. Max padded slowly into the room and sat beside her, his tail brushing lightly against the floor. Luna followed more cautiously, stepping softly across the carpet before jumping onto the empty frame and looking around as if something important was missing. Emily sighed quietly. "Yeah," she murmured. "It looks strange, doesn't it?" That night she slept on the couch. It wasn't very comfortable, but it felt safer. Max curled up on the rug nearby, while Luna claimed the armrest as her temporary sleeping spot. The apartment was quiet, but Emily didn't fall asleep easily. Every small sound made her eyes open. The hum of the refrigerator, a car passing outside, even the quiet rustle of Max shifting in his sleep. At some point in the middle of the night, she caught herself staring at the ceiling, listening carefully. Part of her expected to feel the itching again. Part of her feared waking up with another line of bites across her skin. But morning came without any new marks. When Emily checked her arms in the bathroom mirror, the old bites were still there, slowly fading, but nothing new had appeared. For the first time in weeks, she felt a small sense of relief. Over the next few days, the apartment slowly returned to something resembling normal life. A new mattress was delivered 3 days later. Before bringing it inside, Emily carefully inspected every corner of it, running her hand along the seams and checking every fold of the fabric. She even used the flashlight on her phone to examine the edges of the mattress before allowing herself to place it on the bed frame. Max watched the process with mild confusion. Luna, meanwhile, seemed annoyed that the bed had been unavailable for several nights. Once the mattress was finally in place again, Emily washed brand new sheets and carefully spread them across the bed. For a moment the room looked peaceful again. But something inside her had changed. That night, as she prepared to sleep in her own bed again, Emily hesitated before turning off the light. She pulled back the blanket. Then she examined the seams of the mattress, carefully, slowly. Her fingers traced along the stitching. Nothing moved. She checked the corners, then the edges near the bed frame. Still nothing. Only after she finished inspecting every part of the mattress did she finally lie down. Max jumped onto the bed a few seconds later and curled up near her feet, just as he always had. Luna returned to her favorite spot beside the pillow, settling down with a quiet purr. For a moment, everything felt the same as it had weeks earlier. But Emily noticed something new about herself. She was listening. Even after turning off the lamp and closing her eyes, part of her mind remained alert. Every small movement in the room caught her attention. The soft shift of blankets, Max adjusting his position, Luna stretching beside her. Sleep came slowly. But when morning arrived, there were still no new bites. The follow-up visit from Daniel happened a few days later. He carefully inspected the bedroom again, checking the mattress seams and the wooden frame with his flashlight. After several minutes, he stood up and smiled slightly. "Looks good," he said. "No signs of activity." Emily felt a weight lift from her chest. "So they're gone?" Daniel nodded. "They should be." Max wagged his tail as if celebrating the news. Emily laughed softly. "That's the best thing I've heard all week." Daniel packed his equipment and headed for the door. "Just keep an eye on things," he said before leaving. "And if you ever notice bites again, call us right away." Emily nodded. "I will." After he left, the apartment felt peaceful again. For the first time in days, Emily allowed herself to relax completely on the couch while Max rested beside her. Luna slept quietly in the afternoon sunlight on the windowsill. The crisis was over, but even weeks later, Emily still had one new habit. Every night before going to bed, she checked the mattress. She ran her fingers along the seams, looked beneath the edges. Sometimes she even lifted the corner of the mattress slightly just to be certain. Most nights she found nothing. Still, she checked anyway. Because once you've experienced something like that, it's hard to completely forget. And although life in the apartment returned to normal, Emily understood something now that she hadn't understood before. Sometimes the smallest creatures inside a home can cause the biggest sleepless nights. A few weeks passed after the treatment, and slowly, life inside Emily's apartment began to feel normal again. The itching was gone. The red marks on her arms and shoulders faded day by day until they finally disappeared completely. The anxiety that had once followed her into bed every night gradually softened into something quieter, something more like caution than fear. Still, Emily found herself thinking about the experience more often than she expected. One quiet Sunday morning, she sat near the window with a cup of coffee, while Max lay stretched across the floor beside her. Luna occupied her usual spot on the windowsill, her tail gently flicking as she watched pigeons gather on the railing outside. Sunlight filled the room warm and calm. From the outside, nothing about the apartment looked unusual. But Emily knew that only a few weeks earlier, something very different had been happening inside these same walls. Something small, almost invisible, and yet powerful enough to steal nights of sleep without her even realizing it at first. She glanced down at Max, who had rolled onto his back in the middle of the rug, completely relaxed. "You really love that park," she said softly. Max opened one eye and wagged his tail slowly. Emily smiled. She didn't blame him. The park had always been their favorite place to walk together. The open grass, the trees, the sounds of other dogs playing. It had always felt like the most peaceful part of her daily routine. But now she understood something she hadn't understood before. Sometimes the smallest things travel home with us. Tiny insects hidden in fur, eggs invisible to the eye, creatures small enough to hide inside the seams of a mattress or the cracks of a wooden frame. And once they settle in, they can remain unnoticed far longer than people expect. Emily stood up and walked into the bedroom. The bed looked completely normal again. Fresh sheets, clean pillows, nothing out of place. But before sitting down, she performed the small routine she had developed since the incident. She lifted the corner of the blanket, ran her fingers slowly along the mattress seam, checked the edge near the bed frame. Everything looked perfectly clean. Satisfied, she sat down on the bed. Moments later, Max jumped up beside her, circling twice before settling near her feet. Luna followed shortly after, claiming her usual place beside the pillow. Emily leaned back against the headboard. For a moment she simply listened to the quiet sounds of the apartment, Max breathing slowly, Luna purring softly, the distant hum of traffic somewhere far below. Peaceful. But the experience had left her with a new awareness. She now recognized the signs she once ignored. The small red bites arranged in a line, the strange itching that appeared only during the night, the tiny black specks hidden in a dog's fur. At the time, each clue had seemed small and unrelated, easy to dismiss. But together they told a story she hadn't yet understood. And that was the lesson Emily carried with her now. Sometimes the first warning signs are quiet, so quiet that people brush them aside without thinking. A small itch, a few red marks, a speck of dirt on a pet's fur. None of those things seem serious on their own. But sometimes those tiny details are the beginning of a much bigger problem, hiding just out of sight. Emily reached over and turned off the bedside lamp. Darkness slowly settled across the room. Max shifted slightly near her feet. Luna curled closer against the pillow. And just before closing her eyes, Emily did the one thing that had become her new habit. She reached down and touched the edge of the mattress one last time. Still clean, still quiet, still safe. Only then did she finally relax beneath the blankets. Because after everything that had happened, Emily understood something she would probably never forget. Sometimes the smallest creatures in a home are the ones that cause the biggest sleepless nights. But once you learn to recognize the signs, you'll never ignore them again.